Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where we talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about Secret Invasion, Season 1, Episode 5. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, we're picking up in the aftermath of last episode. Fury is doing everything he can to protect the president. The president's out. He's whispering in his ear, don't trust Rhodey, don't let him anywhere near you. This wasn't the Russians, this wasn't them. Trying to do everything he can to stop this, but the plan moves on because for Gravik he's upset because it's like, right, the plan didn't work out the way I wanted it to, and he's got dissension of the ranks because his right hand guy who's trusted him this entire time is like, dude, we at least removed Talos from the board, but it's like, yeah, but the president's still alive, so how does that really help our plan? And it's like, well, you're the one who also failed to kill Fury. You keep not killing Fury. It's like, well, because Fury has what I need, and we find out what it is, what this has all been about, because it's like, oh, I don't have to worry about the Avengers, and as I do think I don't have a contingency for that. His contingency is he planned on getting the Avengers DNA, which is so interesting on so many levels, because I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but that conversation Fury has with Sonya later on, going and having that conversation is, he says that basically, it seems like basically he had people come and collect their DNA because plenty of Avengers bled during that fight against Thanos. It seems like that's the only fight I can really think of, considering he was like including Carol Danvers. So their blood and DNA was all over that battlefield. So someone swooped in and collected it. It's also interesting to think about two things. One, that's interesting. That seems like that could come back in play later on. I mean, obviously with everything going on, that's always going to be something in play. But it's, I guess maybe that will tie into Secret Wars, maybe in some shape or fashion or form. Maybe you don't necessarily have to go multiversal. Maybe you just have a Skrull or someone disguised as heroes or something like that. I doubt that's the route they'll go, but it's just interesting to know that. But one other thing I was thinking was like, well, Natasha didn't participate in that battle, so her DNA would probably she'd be the only Avenger who didn't have any blood or DNA on that battlefield. You'd assume that she was the only Avenger that wasn't there, so because she died before the battle, so that's something. But also, two of the people who don't want their blood or DNA out there to replicate what they are, both potentially have their blood samples, their DNA and samples taken by Fury. That being Bruce, because even in She-Hulk, what did he do after Jennifer became the way she did? Is like he immediately burned the blood because I do not want another me out there. I can't take the chance like that someone could do something with my blood. Turns out Fury's had a sample potentially this entire time, so there's that. But also, same thing for Steve. That means like he has some form of the super soldier serum. To be fair, that was already back in play in Falcon and the Winter Soldier, but it seemed like the last of it went in John Walker, so but potentially some of that's still there, especially if you have Steve's DNA, which you'd assume like it's not just his DNA, so you could replicate it as a Skrull, like his becoming Steve, but it's also about his powers as a super soldier are there as well. So that's something to really think about, which I think is kind of interesting. I'm curious because that won't, I mean, it'll at least help with the shape-shifting aspect, because not everyone is like a Steve or a Bruce where their powers are integrated into their DNA. I mean, like Thor, for example, like he's in that same category, but like what about Scott and Hope? Obviously, their powers are more tech-based because they're based around their suits. So, yeah, once again, it helps with the probably infiltration and, like, shape-shifting aspect of it. But, like, their case, it's like their powers are technologically based. It's purely with their equipment and not them themselves. So that's going to be an interesting thing to kind of delineate. Same thing in the same capacity with Tony. Like, right, all his powers are tech-based because it's the suits, not him himself, you know? But you could still copy his brain and his memories and be as smart as Tony. So, you just assume the same thing. Also could still be applicable to Shira too, because they are two of the smartest people in the MCU. So, just something to kind of think about. Either way, going off of that large tangent, sorry, But I thought that was such an interesting drop of information. But getting back to the point too of like knowing that that's been grabbed, it's like, oh, I'll fight the Avengers with the Avengers, especially when I have a million army scroll. Well, not a million army, but there are a million scrolls here, and if I can radicalize them all behind my cause, like when the time comes, it'll make it easier. I mean, you don't even need the entire probably scroll population to like participate in this battle. Like, it's not like there's that many Avengers and Warriors all across the board. It's like, it's just enough that you could probably like just get a radical group enough. I mean, or not unless he does his thing and he tries to become like, the super scroll where he ends up getting every superhero's abilities. Who knows? But anyway, Gravik's kind of becoming unhinged because he's tired of all this dissension amongst his ranks, because he ends up killing his right-hand guy, just like rips through him with the Groot arm. And it's like, oh yeah, because like, for him, he's paranoid because it's like, well, I can't trust anyone anyway, because it's like, right, we were found out so soon of what we were up to because someone kind of let it slip. I've had so much dissension among my rank. I had to deal with him, I had to deal with Gaia. Like, so the fact of the matter is, I am not going to tolerate that. And even leaning into it, saying like, you are nameless, you are faceless, you are whoever and whatever I need you to be, which I guess is almost like the extremist version of what Fury did. They were his spy network. So I guess it's like Gravik's kind of pushing that even further. Like, you kind of have no name and no face. I'm what gives you purpose. I'm the one leading this charge. This fight is all about sacrifice. And, there's another sacrifice for the cause. And so he has Rhodey. It's like, right, I want you to release the footage about the scrolls. I want you to even show satellite footage of this compound. It's like, I want them to know that there's he wants to use all of this to his advantage, especially where this compound is. It's on Russian soil, so it's supposed to feed the notion that the scrolls are working with the Russians. And it's like, oh, the Russians are going to deny it, but yeah. And for Rhodey, he's already backed Nick into a corner because he's already released the footage. It's like, right, 30 seconds from now, the footage of you killing Maria Hill is going to go public. So better run while you can, Fury. Because Fury's like, I could like kill you right now. He's like, yeah, you could, but you're not ready to die yet, because the moment you pull the trigger on me, someone's going to pull the trigger on you. They're not going to hesitate. So, which is like, is no one hearing? That's also that thing you always have. People always like, oh, why are people so loud? Like in movies and TV shows when they're having these conversations, I always associate it with, well, yes, like the conversation has to be loud so it's picked up on mic and that we as the audience can hear it. But this conversation is probably like, it's probably more like a whisper, but for the context of like, in the context of the conversation, it might be a lot lower voiced and they might be saying it to each other. But for the context of like being able to hear it as an audience, like it's said in a more normal level conversation speed, that's what I'm assuming. That's how I always interpret that. So like that conversation might not have been as loud as we as the audience think it was. Come like, oh, dude, you're right there. I mean, granted, there's so much stuff Rhodey's saying like that you don't have the context for, but still. I mean, also you can't take Fury's word for it regardless of like him being like, yo, your buddy here, Rhodey's a Skrull or whatever, so. But yeah, their plan is to keep the president alive. It's like, well, the point was to kill him and make it seem like the Russians did, but if he's still alive, we can still use this to our advantage, and now they're going to use all of New Skrullos as a bargaining chip for Nick. It's like, he's not going to want all these innocent Skrulls killed. And it's like, everyone's at Gravik's mercy because no one can stop him. They literally tried to jump him and they got their asses handed to him. What was his name? Like Bolo? Like ended up like getting his throat slit at the end, And it's like, right, he's running things like a dictator. Because everyone believed in him and followed him, but he's just kind of a raving lunatic. He always has been, but he's presented himself a certain way. It's just like, I guess you can almost look at it as like you're kind of this impertinent child, because this kind of plays into a conversation Priscilla and Gaia have, because it's like you're both radicals in the regards that you're both so young. You don't know what you don't know. And the fact is, you're so young and you're so quick to think you know everything, and so you're doing your thing. But it's like, because in a sense, because it's like, right, Gaia and Gravik have known each other since they were kids, so it's like they kind of are cut from the same cloth in some capacity. She just hasn't gone off the deep end as much as he, but obviously she tiptoed in that direction. I mean, she was a part of all of this to begin with. Difference is she ended up being able to kind of separate enough to walk away from it. I guess like she also had the benefit of her dad was still around, you know? Gravik lost his parents a long time ago, and I think that made him like that anger has been boiling inside of him ever since then. And I think Fury and the others tried to navigate that, try to put it towards something good, but it's like he was consumed by that rage and, you know, the anger of not having his parents, not actually having a home, and it's just been building and building and building. And the longer and longer Fury and Carol didn't keep their promise, the more angrier he got, and to the point he is where he's at right now. Fury did say like Gravik was the leader of the collectors. It makes you wonder who else was a collector, because I would assume Talos didn't know about the harvest either. There was this line from Fury I thought was really interesting when him and Gaia end up back at that place where Fury kind of like, and Talos like rallied the Skrulls to kind of help out Nick, like saying like, hey, you protect my home, I'll try and find you a new one in the process. That same place, they ended up back there all these years later. And the significance of that place, like what it holds for what the place served as for World War II, it's like, right, it's very befitting that he ended up, you know, making that place the same place that the Skrulls would go. So I thought that was kind of fascinating. I mean, that would kind of be the same, like, you know, they were escaping a war, the extinction of their people, and, you know, especially in World War II, which, you know, parallel-wise was about the extinction specifically of multiple groups, but, you know, one group in particular was kind of facing that same thing. So there's this interesting pair, but it was more so like, was it like people escaping the West Indies? I think is what he said. There were the people who gravitated here. So, but like it's more so like people escaping a war situation. But it's just like there are parallels between what the Skrulls are going through and just what was kind of happening in World War II. It's just kind of this interesting parallel. Because obviously for Guy, it's like, I always knew my dad was going to lose. That's why I was never supportive of him being on the side of the fight. But for Nick, it's like, your dad didn't lose. Like, he fought for what he believed in. And it's your time now, Guy. It's time for you to step up and decide, what are you going to fight for? Like, are you going to are you going to take up this fight or not? You know? Your dad, because for her, because he's like, your dad died. She's like, no, let me just stop you there. My dad died. He died fighting for this cause. He died on the side that I always knew he would die. You know, it's like I lost both of my parents now. So, and especially considering the last time they spoke, they didn't make things right. There was just, and that's so true to any life, because it's like, right, there's so much animosity that she has towards her dad that it's like they were never going to fix all that in a single time frame. And now they'll never get the opportunity to fix that. So it does seem like they're sticking with the whole Maria Hill's dead, Talos is dead, but Gaia went to Priscilla to help bury her dad, which I was like, wow, like, wait, will Priscilla actually be here? We know Gravik is sending people after him. It's like, well, do they know where she lives? I'm sure she probably gave them that information, but it's like, but for her, it's like, no, I'm actively staying here because this place meant a lot for me. She's the one that, she's like, I picked it out back when I had Fury in mind for starting a home with. But she's like, yeah, but I never knew if he would actually go for it. I mean, he's a man who would never really fully settle down, because I don't know if he'd ever really consider having a place that is home. And it's like, right, this place gave him everything he wanted. It gave him privacy, security, and I love, she's like, leather, and it's like, she said something else at the end. I don't remember now, because all I remember is Guy's joke about leather or whatever. But for her, it's like, yeah, whatever I'm going to face, I'd rather face it in my home, in this place that is filled with happiness. The sad thing is, like, Gaia ended up kind of like shitting on it a little bit, because for her, Gaia's whole point is, you placate too much to this world. Like, we can't even just be ourselves. You had to, like, it's like, she's like, yeah, because I used to stare at Fury for hours on end when he'd sit there, look out the window, like, let the sun come down on him as you read something. And it's like, oh yeah, did he ever, like, when it came to your skin, like, who you really were? And she's like, oh, I didn't mean to offend. It's like, no, you did. It's like, once again, you're young. You don't know what it takes to kind of, like, make something like this work between us and stuff. That there's complicated compromise, because, I mean, especially for Priscilla, as we learned last episode, it ran deeper for her. Being Priscilla wasn't just about, like, putting on this face. It was becoming someone she kind of wasn't, So she kind of became the real Priscilla, rather than kind of like, it no longer was like the mask, it was just kind of who she was. So it's just like, right, it's easy for you to say that, because once again, you have this youth and naivety to just kind of assume like the world's going to work the way you think it does, that you can't just, like, that things come with compromise and complications, But I think I also get where Guy is coming from, kind of like her anger, because she feels like, right, we're so inundated and so infused with, like, these, like, once again, this isn't our world yet. We're, like, shifting so much of who we are just to be on this planet, especially because they've lost so much of, like, their culture. Because for her, it's like, right, the ceremony for, like, giving her father, like, kind of almost like a Vikings, like, funeral, not really, it's just kind of like burning of the body and stuff. For her, it's like, I don't remember the prayer that you kind of have to say. Luckily Priscilla does, and I think that's just more that reason why I've just, like, so much of who we are we've lost along the way here on this earth, because I mean, when they lost their world, I'm sure, like, so much of their history and their culture was burnt and lost with it. I'm sure I brought it up before, but maybe I haven't. This show also surprised me with, like, how bloody and violent it could be. It's like, like, especially when Priscilla and, that whole sequence where Priscilla and, Gaia were just, like, ripping through all those people Gravik sent after them. It's like, but still, that one dude who was, like, busting through the window, they shot him, and you can even see later on his body is, like, still connected to the rope, and his body's, like, half out the window. It's like, Jesus, that was brutal. It's like, the brutality in the show is, well, I mean, hell, even Gravik, like, tossing people around and even, like, slitting, I think the guy's name was, like, a Bolo or something like that, like, his throat earlier in the episode. It's just so interesting. You also have Sonya, which I'm just like, oh, dude, I love Olivia Colman, dude. It's just like, oh, just like, I love that character, and just, like, how much fun she has on screen. It's just so good. Where it's just kind of like, cool, you expose your boss for being the Skrull that he is in front of everybody. It's like, cool, so now she's the boss. Her whole situation with the scientist behind Gravik's machine and stuff, and it's like, oh, who are you? And she's like, hey, Skrulls. She's like, I can be your bestie, or I cannot be your bestie. That really comes down to you. And it's like, oh, Nigel, we're gonna have to talk to someone about admin. He's like, my name is Victor, and he's like, no, I know. Nigel's the person that's got the silencer back, to the back of your skull. It's like, and there we go. It's just like, just chewing up the scenery, and I love it. It's just like, oh God, you were just so good. Like, you just, like, steal the scenes time and time again. And so for her, they're like, okay, I even love when the husband tried to, like, it's like, right, I would rather kill my wife than let her be a traitor. And she's like, oh, I bet you would. She's like, you're kind of the man on this earth, like, you kind of gaslight and kill women. It's like, yeah, that's what all the podcasts are about these days. Quick draw, pow. So it's like, cool. So, once again, it's like, you're going to tell me every detail about this machine and stuff. So, obviously, at the time, she didn't know about Rhodey being a Skrull, so she kind of sided with him about how this all goes. So, she kind of played into his hands, getting England's support. And that's why Rhodey's like, right, if we have England support, we're most likely going to have every other country support, which obviously it's like some of those countries' leaders are Skrulls, as we know, so it makes that a little easier to kind of flow. It's like, oh yeah, NATO's going to have our back, and yada, 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 so on and so forth, right? So it's like, yeah, we know how, we see how we see what's happening in this type of situation. But either way, putting all that aside, she does meet up with Nick later. And I love, so like I love that Nick was on that plane. I was like, wait, isn't that Natasha's buddy from Black Widow? I believe it was. It's like, yeah. He's like, oh, the helicarrier. Oh, it's kind of mothballs. Kind of like you should be. And she's like, really, my dude? It's like, yeah. And it's like, gives him something. It's like, yeah, you can. He's like, okay, you're welcome. Go ahead, take a nap. You're going to probably need it. So it's like, that's obviously someone he knows through Natasha, obviously. Not unless he introduced Natasha to him, but either way. So I thought that was kind of a neat little kind of appearance. But I love that he uses like the widow like staying of like hiding your face, and I love that Sonya's like, can that like $1 billion in research and stuff like that, and it can only like the widow tech can only cover your face. He's like, yeah, but that's the old one. The new one can kind of cover everyone else. It's like, okay. And I love that she turns on the radio. I'm like, if I'm not mistaken, that was Stormzy, and like Fury is like, so that's what we're doing. She's like, yes, that's exactly what we're doing. Buckle your seatbelt, and kind of goes on. I was like, I did it. I love Stormzy. I was like, that's sick. It's like, it kind of makes sense. He's one of the I probably made the argument. I think the argument could be made that he's the biggest artist in the grime scene, I think. I'd probably say. I mean, to be fair, I'm not well versed in that scene. So he's like one of the only names I know in that scene. So that, that might be bias in my own, my own like ignorance and bias coming out in that. But I just thought that was dope. But either way, on the way there, they had the whole conversation about the harvest and stuff like that, and also Rhodey being a Skrull. But that's why Nick has taken up this fight, why it's so personal to him, because it's like, yeah, because none of the Avengers can defend the world like I can, because I have my way of doing things, which can be very... He has very isolating and very not always great and kind of manipulative manner of handling things that won't side well with how the Avengers approach things. But for him, it's like, this is my fight, and that's why I came back to Earth, why I feel responsible, because Gravik's doing all of this, because he's the one that like kind of brought up Gravik in this fight, probably like was one of his most reliable like assets in so many capacities. So it's like, yeah, anything that he's doing, this is all on me, because it's also like, right, you're the one that started all this, because you gave Gravik the ammunition of what he's trying to aim for now, because you gave him the idea for the Super Skrull by collecting the DNA and blood samples and all that of every Avenger out there. So now, the thing I'm unclear about is that scene at the like graveyard. It's like, okay, why in Finland? And it's like, well, this is where Priscilla and I had our honeymoon, and it's like, right, they enjoy and Skrulls enjoyed the cold, because he's got well, at first, because I interpreted that a different way initially when he was like, oh yeah, because Skrulls enjoy the cold or whatever, and she was looking like, wait, and he's like, now you're seeing what's going on. I don't know if it's meant to be like, oh, because the DNA's, the harvest is here and it needs to be kept somewhere cold. I don't know if that's what that... My initial thought was like, is that him implying that he's a Skrull, that he enjoyed this place? It wasn't just because of Priscilla, he's also a Skrull and no one else knew, maybe? I don't know if that's what that's supposed to be indicative of. I'm like, like I said, I could be completely misreading that situation. It could have just been like, no, that's entirely because of the harvest. Like, I am an idiot. I wish they had spelled it out, because I don't know. It's like, oh, it's like, I don't know if that was them implying that he's a Skrull, was it, like I said, or whether that was just like, no, it's cold because the harvest needs to be kind of kept cold, so that's why I chose this particular place. Well, apparently he moves it around, so maybe the other places where his graves are serves that purpose, and you'd assume those are probably the other places Gravik's probably aware of that he hid. This was probably the one place he didn't, because probably Priscilla hid this particular location because it's the one that holds significance to him, because it's like, right, we had our honeymoon here, so she probably kept that information to herself. So that's probably why Gravik knew where to probably strike every other place that the harvest could have been, except this place, because it's significant. So, but Fury's locked and loaded and ready to go. He only got like a single pistol, got his coat, got his beanie, and got his eye patch, which I'm like, is that really all you're getting from that place? I mean, I guess that's all you're going to need. It's also like I'm prepared. I'm ready to end this, and this is all I'm going to need to put this and bring this all to an end. I mean, we have a looming world war on the brink, potentially, an entire, compound full of scrolls is being threatened. So how this plays out is definitely going to be interesting. Obviously, next episode is the finale. So how this all comes to an end, how this gets resolved. I mean, not even resolve, like how much, how this plays out and how that carries over going forward. How much of that carries over into that movie, how much gets really touched on at all, or whether that's just something like, right, however Secret Invasion ends, it kind of simmers in the back of the MCU for a while everything else kind of plays out, but that's always going to be this ever-present thing of, there's still a million scrolls here, and, if any of that gets resolved at all, does Carol find out about the DNA situation, about the scrolls and all, how much, we still just don't know. But either way, I'm very excited to ultimately see how this all comes to an end. But really, that's all I want to talk about. So the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.